Hello, I'm back. Are you ready for part 2? Right then, where were we? But I wasn't behind that oak tree. I was along the path there, said Barney. Oh, don't be silly, Barney. I saw you with my own eyes, didn't I? Said Lou crossly. You must have been there. But I wasn't, I promise, Barney protested. How could I have got there? Lou said nothing for a moment. Then, in a different voice, she said, I think we'd better stop playing this game. We'll only be late for the party. Let's just walk on. They went on side by side. The wood was getting really dark now, and as they went along by the fir plantation, the leopard and the hunter actually found themselves holding hands. You know, people say they sometimes have a feeling someone's following them, Lou suddenly said in a voice that tried to be bright and ordinary. What about it? Said Barney. Oh, nothing, said Lou. I suppose it's not far now to the Falcombe Greens. But Barney had suddenly had an idea. Lou had seen something behind an oak tree, looking like him. And now there was this feeling of being followed. Barney thought he knew what was going on, but Lou didn't, and he laughed softly to himself. I don't see there's anything to laugh at, snapped Lou, almost tearfully, and she stamped her foot. They came out at last into the lane, crossed over, and there was the entrance to the Falcombe Greens drive. They could see cars parked outside the house, big ones and little ones, and lights blazed from the windows and from over the front door. Lou's eyes began to sparkle, but now Barney started to feel uncomfortable. He liked parties almost as much as Lou, once they had started, but he felt shy about going up to the big front door and ringing the bell. As Lou skipped up the steps and pulled the handle, Barney took a grip on his axe and looked back along the shadowy drive. And yes, he was almost sure something had slipped between two rhododendron bushes. It was what he had thought. Someone was lurking behind them. It was Stig. The front door opened and Mrs. Falcombe Green stood there, looking a little distracted already. Hello, do come in, she cried. Oh, it's the puma and the caveman. How sweet of you to come, and how realistic. She sniffed a little at the animal smell that came in with them, but there was a wail from behind her, and she had to turn around to the mass of children of all ages who were hurtling about the big hall or standing dumbly in corners. Oh dear, who is it behind the mask there? Lone Ranger, or is it Zorro? Please don't poke little Bo Peep with your sword, will you, dear? She's only 3 and she doesn't like it. Lou looked round excitedly at the dressed-up children. There were peasant girls and ladies from the Middle Ages, and cowboys and kings and queens and cowboys, and a spaceman, and who was looking rather hot already. More cowboys and Indians and squaws, but she seemed to be the only one in a real animal skin. Barney was looking at the walls of the hall. Look at all those things on the wall, Lou, he whispered. There was hardly a square foot of the wall that was not covered with trophies, heads of gazelles and hartebeest and gnus, bunches of spears and leather shields, racks of swords and daggers and old guns. This is a super place, murmured Barney. I'm so glad we came, aren't you? Mrs. Falcombe Green clapped her hands loudly. Now then, children, she called. I think we're all here, so we'll start off by dancing. Sir Roger de Cloverley, I expect you all know it, don't you? The girls do anyway, and they can show the boys. Most of the girls began twittering with pleasure and formed themselves in line ready to begin. But there were glum looks among the boys, and they stood around grasping various weapons. It was going to be that sort of party, was it? Come on, boys, line up. All pistols, tomahawks, ray guns and stone axes on the oak chest, if you please, caroled Mrs. Falcon Green, as she sat down at a big grand piano. The boys lined up sheepishly and the music began, and the girls hopped and skipped and the boys blundered and bumped, and everyone was rather glad when the dance came to an end. Mrs. Falcon Green had got everything well organised. After the dancing they had guessing games and acting games and sitting in a ring games, and she had just handed out pieces of paper and pencils to everyone who could write, and got one of the older girls to do Ring a Ring of Roses with the tinies, when all the lights went out. "The fuses!" wailed Mrs. Falcon Green. "One of you older ones get a game going, will you? I won't be long, I hope." And she made her way into the back part of the house. There was a lot of scuffling and squeaking in the dark, only lit by the flickering flames from the big fireplace. Of course, it had to be Lou who thought of something. "We'll have a leopard hunt," she said. "Give me 20 to get away, and you've all got to hunt me and put me in a cage, all right?" There were shouts of agreement. Boys scrambled for their weapons in the dark. Several people counted up to 20. Everybody shouted, "Coming!" And except for a few tiny ones who stayed by the fire, everyone scattered up the stairs and along corridors, whooping and chattering and telling each other to be quiet. Barney was one of the first up the broad staircase and onto the dark landing. Moonlight came in through a leaded window and shone on a figure standing there. He was just going to say something to it when he noticed it was an empty suit of old-fashioned armour. But there was someone coming up the stairs close behind. He saw the headdress of the Indian chief. "Seen the leopard?" asked the Indian. "No," said Barney. "Let's go along here." They went along the corridor, and at the end there was a bare wooden staircase going up and down. "Come on up," said the Indian. They climbed the stairs, their feet making quite a noise on the bare boards, and found themselves almost at the top of the house. There was an unlived-in feeling up there. The Indian tried the door of a room, and it opened. There was nothing but boxes and trunks in the room, and there was a big window through which the moonlight came. "That leads onto the roof, that window," said the Indian. "I know. I've been there." "Perhaps she's on the roof. The leopard, I mean," said Barney. "Might be," said the Indian. He struggled to open the window. They both got through it and out onto a ledge with a parapet. The roof sloped up behind them. They leaned over the parapet and looked a long way down to the moonlit lawn. And there, in the middle of the lawn, an animal was crouching. Barney's heart gave a bump, although he knew he was only hunting for his sister. "Look," he gasped to his friend, the Indian. "There it is, the leopard, down there." "Crumbs," exclaimed the Indian. "Doesn't it look real?" "Come on, down again, quick." They got back in through the window, bumped through the box room, clattered down the stairs and made for the main staircase, calling out, "Outside, everybody, the leopard's in the garden. Everybody out." Hunters, who had been crawling under beds and giggling in closets and wardrobes, made for the staircase too. And the big door was left open and they all streamed out into the moonlit garden. "In the shrubbery!" shouted Barney. "Leopard's in the shrubbery, let's drive it out." Pirates, cowboys and shepherdesses piled into the shrubbery, whooping and crashing, and out of the corner of his eyes Barney saw something bolt out of the undergrowth and into the shadow of the house. "Tally-ho!" he hallooed, and sped after it along the gravel path and round the back, past glass houses and outbuildings. He heard running feet behind him. The Indian and some other hunters were on the trail too. In front of him were two big wooden gates, open and leading into a paved stable yard with buildings all around it. "In there!" he panted. "I saw it go." He dashed through the gateway and at least half a dozen others clattered in with him. "Quick, shut the gates! Don't let it get out," he heard the Indian say. And the heavy wooden doors banged to behind him. But Barney stood rooted to the paving, unable to move. The other children behind him were suddenly still and silent too. The boy dressed as the Indian gave a shaky whisper. There's 2 leopards. The moonlight shone clearly on the roofs of the buildings and the checkered paving of the yard, and clearly in the moonlight, like 2 figures on a stage, 2 animal forms crouched facing each other. Both had golden, black-spotted fur and long tails. But as one of the crouching beasts turned its head to glare at the hunters by the gate, its eyes flashed green and alive in the moonlight. And under the mask of the other beast, Barney recognized the white face of his sister. How long they all stood like that, Barney didn't know. Barney grasping his stone axe, but feeling as if he was turned to stone himself. Lou crouched there, desperately willing her whole body to turn into a real-life wild beast to meet this awful peril. And the real-life leopard itself, because it couldn't be anything else. Frightened by all the hullabaloo, mystified by the strange half-beast, half-human that faced it, cornered and angry. It was like a nightmare game, when nobody knew what the next move should be. And then Barney heard the Indian behind him give another hoarse whisper. 2 cavemen! For out of the shadows at the far end of the yard appeared a figure that might have been his own reflection in a mirror. Shaggy hair, rabbit skins and bare limbs. But this one carried a long spear with a glinting blade, and it was levelled at the real leopard. And suddenly Barney's limbs unfroze and he whispered, "Stig!" The leopard shifted its gaze. It shot a glance at Barney. It looked back at the unmoving Lou. It turned to the advancing Stig and gave a low growl. Its tail twitched and it began tucking its feet under it, as a cat does when it's about to charge and spring. Stig crouched too, still pointing his spear. And Barney saw that in the shadows beyond, Stig was the open door of an empty stable. The leopard had decided which was its most dangerous enemy and now kept its eyes on Stig. Barney crept forward behind it. It was almost within axe reach of its twitching tail. The leopard stopped shifting its feet. Its tail lay still for an instant. Its muscles were tense. It sprang, but as it sprang, Barney brought his axe down on the tip of its tail. Lou burst into life with a sudden roar. Stig threw himself sideways, and the startled and confused leopard jumped twice as high and twice as far as it had meant to, and vanished into the dark doorway of the stable. Barney hurled himself forward, slammed the lower half of the door shut, and then the upper half, and gasped, "Quick, quick, quick, somebody bolt it!" Lou and the Indian struggled with the bolts, and at last they all sank down on the paving, feeling exhausted and weak. The other children had now opened the gates of the yard, and the rest of the party was streaming in, chattering and asking questions. "Where's the leopard? Have you caught the leopard? Is the game over now? What do you mean it was a real leopard? Let's have another leopard hunt. It was super fun." "Why can't we have another leopard hunt? What do you mean the leopard's in the stable? There's the leopard." "2 leopards? Oh, well, that's not fair. Nobody told us there were 2 leopards. Why can't we see the other leopard in the stable? Let's let it out and have another hunt." And the boy in the Zorro suit was actually fumbling with the bolts and trying to open the door of the stable. Stig, who was standing there, rapped him over the knuckles with the haft of his spear. "All right, caveman," said Zorro crossly. "I can open the door if I want to. It's not your business." But Stig turned his spear round and threatened him with the pointy end. And Zorro retreated, saying, "No need to get nasty." Then suddenly all the windows of the big house blazed with light again. And then the voice of Mrs. Forkham Green came from the front steps, calling, "Children, children, you're all to come in at once. Everyone inside, as quick as ever you can." And she sounded as if she was almost frightened of something. As they all trooped round to the front entrance, they noticed a big truck in the drive and strange men standing around. And some of them had rifles. Mrs. Forkham Green was standing on the steps, flapping her hands. Come along, she cried. "It was so naughty of you to go outside. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just go in the hall and stand still while I count you all." They all stood wide-eyed in the hall as Mrs. Forkham Green slammed the big door behind her and leant against it with a white face, counted the guests and then counted again and muttered to herself, "Oh dear, how many should there be? Little Jonathan couldn't come because of the measles, and then there's Betty Strickwell who didn't answer." The children began to join in with helpful voices. "Where's the other caveman?" "Yes, there's supposed to be 2 cavemen, I saw them." "And there's the 2... Please be quiet, you only confuse me," moaned Mrs. Forkham Green. She turned to a strange man in a raincoat who was standing by the door. "I think they're all here, Mr. she said. "Would you like to explain?" "Sorry to spoil your party, kiddies," said the man. "I'm from Bottom Circus, and I'm afraid one of our animals got loose from its travelling cage, and it must be somewhere about here. But don't worry, we'll soon catch him." There were excited gasps and whistles from the children, and then Lou spoke up. "It was a leopard, wasn't it?" she said. The man looked at Lou. "Yes, girlie," he smiled. "Like you, only a bit fiercer." And Barney stepped forward. "It's all right, sir," he said. "We put it in the stables, me and Stig and Lou. I'll help you get it out if you like." There we go. That is the end of chapter 7. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want me to read chapter 8, you can comment on this. We've allowed the comments on these videos now. Or you can pop a little message onto Purple Mash. And hopefully speak to you all again soon. Bye-bye.